Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to our town hall meeting here at Kent, here in Kent. We're excited to have you here. The title of our town hall is Are We Not One? A town hall meeting in the city of Kent and its environments. Welcome to those of you who are in the audience and to those of you who are watching us online. Welcome to our panelists. My name is Grantley Martelly, and I am going to be the moderator for this event today. I have a couple reminders before we get started. Please remember that if you are here in the auditorium with us, that we are following the COVID-19 protocols, so masks are required in the event for the entirety of the event unless you're one of the speakers at the time they're speaking. Our panelists are appropriately distanced. We've tried to separate as best as we can to make sure that we can follow the rules. And they have the option to remove their mask when they're speaking as well. If you need restrooms are through the door right here to my left, down the hallway. The ladies is the first restroom and the men's is the second restroom. If you're here in the auditorium with us and you need anything, we have ushers in the back who can help you find what you need. So welcome. If you're online, you know where everything is, where you are, so we assume that you can figure that out. The purpose of this town hall is to discuss issues current to this community and, for that matter, to the nation, and to seek to discover ways each panelist is working to make a difference. It is not a gotcha minute for any of our panelists or our guests. The city of Kent is the 10th most diverse city in the United States. When compared to Renton, which is ranked 16th, Tacoma, which is ranked 124th, and Seattle, which is 135th. This makes leading and serving in this community an opportunity that is not business as usual. You don't have the luxury of saying that's the way we always done it. And if we are, then it's probably not a good thing. The world is becoming more diverse, and Kent is an example of what that diversity can look like. The opportunities afforded by freedom of movement, globalization, global economics, education, and conflicts are causing people to disperse around the world, some by choice and some by force. And we're seeing some of those benefits here in the city of Kent and the surrounding environments in South King County. Issues of faith and race are at the heart of everything we do. And in this city, ignoring the role of diversity that diversity plays in politics, in schools, in healthcare, in housing, economic policy, public safety, and transportation would be a mistake for any leader who intends to do that job well. We can't begin today without a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. Because remember, we live in King County, and many people forget that we try to quote Dr. Martin Luther King and eliminate the most important part of his being. He was first a preacher. His leadership began in the pulpit of a church. And as he said himself, everything he said or did came from that origin. So on the topic of the church and the community, he said, science investigates, religion interprets. Science gives a man's knowledge, which is power, but religion gives a man wisdom, which is control. Science deals mainly with facts. Religion deals mainly with values. And the two are not rivals. So this town hall meeting is being held in a church because we believe a church is the place that should be leading our communities and our nations in this reconciliation and restoration discussion. And it should be the place where everyone can find a seat at the table, because in the church, the table is never full. It is always room for someone else. This town hall is to encourage thinking and to help encourage the hard work of change. So I'd like to introduce to you our panelists right now. We have Jerry Chapman from the Stolo Nation and the 120 Drum Ministry. By the way, the bios of the speakers are available in the lobby and on our website, so I'm not going to read all the bios for you. Kedrick Glover is the founder of Glover Empowerment Mentoring. Dr. Stephen Newby is the Director of Composition at the Center for Worship at Seattle Pacific University. Amy Ingabera is a resident of Kent, a graduate of a high school in Kent, and now a student at Northwest University. Chief Rafael Padilla is the Chief of Police in the City of Kent. Jose Luis Bonilla is the Director of Immigrant Services for World Relief Seattle. Tamina Martelly is the Resiliency Program Manager for World Relief Seattle. Pastor Ev Tustin is our host pastor and the leader of this church. Mayor Dana Ralph is the mayor of the City of Kent. Brenda Fincher is a city council member with the City of Kent. And Chitra Hanstead is the executive director of World Relief Seattle. We'll begin today with Pastor Ev. And Pastor Ev, the first question I have for you is, your church has been invested in the challenging road of multicultural ministry for many years. If there's one thought you would like to pass on in reference to the first steps towards this kind of ministry, what would that be?
I think I'll start. Many of you are familiar with the author Malcolm Gladwell. And he wrote a book called Blink. I don't know if you've read it. That book outlines some of the amazing capabilities that our brain has to process information very rapidly. Some of those amazing things are good news and some of them are bad news. They connect dots before we have a chance really to ration through some of those things. And I was reading through that book, and he highlighted in a chapter, I think it's called 7 Seconds in Brooklyn, one of the devastating things that happened in a conflict where, and I've forgotten the man's name, I think it was Amadou was his first name, but was shot to death, and it had to do with some of the brain function. After reading that, I studied some more about brain function and how it relates to some of the issues that we're working through right now. There was a study done in 2013 in Harvard, and it discusses this idea of color blindness. And it kind of wraps it into this study, and I'll hit this couple things very quickly because I think it's so significant to us. For those of us who have at times said, you know, I'm colorblind, or you've heard someone else say that, the study said this, and I don't mean to sound condemning in this, but it's just the reality. The Harvard Gazette published an article, like I said, in 2013, and it's titled, "What's in a Face?" And this is a quote, it's from the very beginning of that article. It says, "When you meet people for the first time, what's the first thing you think that you noticed? Is it their hair color, their eye color? Maybe it's whether they're wearing a suit, a t-shirt, or jeans, or whether they have a firm handshake. But your brain," Harvard researchers say, "immediately takes note of two key characteristics, their race and their gender." It has to do with this part of our brain called the fusiform gyrus. And it's not something you can shut off. It happens immediately when we look at another person. Race and gender is processed in our brain. Now the question is what we do with that information. But for what I wanted to say to kind of start things off, Grantley, is just this, is if we're going to be working on this dialogue of faith, race, reconciliation, we need to understand that concept and stop using the idea of being colorblind as if that's something that is a positive thing to get to. And here's why. I have at least 3 reasons, and you can probably come up with more. Number one, to say that we're colorblind negates the hard work that some people have to do to work through how they were nurtured, where they grew up. Some people will have a very difficult time working through reconciliation conversation depending upon their upbringing. And so to say, I'm colorblind, and again, I don't mean this as condemning if it's something that you've said before, but we all have to learn, right? So the first thing is that negates the work that someone else has to do in order to get to a place where they have a positive conversation about race and reconciliation. Number two, it's just not physiologically correct. Nobody's born colorblind. And number three, it devalues the incredible, unique ways in which our Creator made us. And He wants us to celebrate those things rather than to try and ignore them.
Mayor Dana, thank you for being here. Knowing that you are the mayor of the 10th most diverse city in the country, when you heard the news about Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, what is the first things that ran through your mind as you thought about how you will now have to lead?
If I'm going to be honest, the first thing is, as a parent, it's heartbreaking. Knowing that all of them had a mom and a dad and family that loved them. And that's honestly the place that I start. A lot of my thinking comes from my frame of reference, right? I know how much I love my children. I know how much I love my family. But I also knew that it meant we were going to have to increase the efforts of the things that we've already been doing. So one of the things I'm extremely proud of in the city of Kent is we've been working in the space around equity and race for a really long time. And I've been shut off at that point by a lot of people saying it doesn't matter what you've already done. But I say that to say we've got a foundation for work. And then I also say it to say we've got way more work to do, right? The world is ever evolving. It is the next thing we did is we sat down as a leadership team to figure out what is it that our community needs? How do we help them process what we've seen happen in other places? How do we help our community wrap their arms around the tragedies that existed? Because we also know that for a lot of people, it triggered personal fears, personal concerns about their family members. And so while it may have happened someplace else, it's a frame of reference for a lot of our residents, for all of us as people. And we needed to figure out how to help our community work through the grief and then work through the anger. So at the city, we've been spending a lot of time over the last few months in particular, figuring out what are the next steps that we need to do to work with our community to heal and come together. And there's some very tangible things. There's things like we're going to be hiring a race and equity manager that will help us look at everything through that lens. That's in the works. But it's also participating in town halls like this and listening and being open. I have gratefully had many of our community members reach out and ask for time to just talk. So it's my time to listen. They get to talk, I get to hear the story, and then take that information, those things that I've learned, because as Pastor said, right, we're always learning. We never get to the point where we're not learning. And how do we incorporate that into taking care of our community in a better, more thoughtful, more responsive way? So we're working through a multitude of plans at this point, and it's not just the talking. It's easy to say we're going to talk about this, and we're going to all get together, and we're going to have a rally, we're going to have something. But what's the outcome? And we have a long list of what will be outcomes for this community in the space around race and equity and diversity in Kent.
Thank you. Councilwoman Fincher, you are on the council and a member of this community, been here for a while. You're also one of the people of color on the council. So how do you see the council leading in these areas of race and equity and access and fair distribution of resources within this community?
As a council member, I think each of us can, for one, get out and make sure that we're talking with the community. Hopefully we've already been in the community, that we already have relationships. But talking with people, hearing them, and then taking that back and making changes for policy, helping support and working with the mayor, with the police department to make sure that changes get brought into the city that are going to help empower people of color, whether it's Native, Black, all people of color. But we have had a lot of emphasis on the Black population because of the hurt and harm that has generationally been done to the Black population here in this country. And so I think that it's important for us to stand up and speak up as council members and make changes on policy based on what we hear, based on what we see, based on what we know. We have our own experiences, we have best practices from some of the other places, and with the help of those who we're talking to, because for me, I feel that this is the time that, like no other, we have a chance now because we have people's attention. This has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And if not talking about it would have solved the problem, we wouldn't have a problem. But evidently, we have a huge problem because people have not talked about race. They haven't talked about ethnicity. They haven't talked about the history and why we are where we are today and the harm that has been done years, generations, centuries. And so taking that information and working with it to make sure that policies get changed that are going to be effective and help all people, but helping lift up those who have been left behind, such as the Black population and the other BIPOC communities.
So has that changed? Has that changed the way, has this 2020 changed the way that you do your job as a council person?
I would say it hasn't changed the way that I do it as much as more attention is there. You know, previously, you know, since I've been on the council, I've always advocated for money for things to deal with race, mostly trainings in the budget. You know, you'd hear things from the public like, you know, don't bring that up, you're going to cause problems if you bring it up, which is why my other comment. But now people who couldn't see that before, we have more people. Some people still can't see why, but we have more people who are listening, more people who are seeing that there really are problems. You know, before you would say that and you might be dismissed. I might be dismissed. You know, oh, well, this happened to me too, or, you know, that's not really a problem, or, you know, different things would be said that were dismissive. And so now it's not dismissed as easily. And we see changes here. I mean, a race and equity manager, that's a change here that we didn't have before. We see trainings taking place here and other places across the country that can do nothing else but help. Because even though I only live in Kent, I travel to Seattle, I travel to Auburn, I travel to Federal Way. So what happens in those places affects me too. And so having people now that are listening and multiple places at multiple levels, the state level is getting some things done that have been far too long overlooked, ignored, and not put in place.
Thank you. Kedrick, we want to talk to you. You are the leader of an organization called Glover Empowerment, and your organization is established to empower and mentor young men, predominantly African American and Hispanic currently right now. So tell us a little bit about your organization and then a little bit about how you are having to lead your organization in this day and age. Has it changed now, or you always knew this was there, so you're just doing what you've always done?
First and foremost, I want to say thank you to Pastor Ev and Grantley for hosting us today, and thank you to Hillside International for allowing us to be here for this critical conversation at this pivotal time. My name is Kendrick Glover, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the founder and executive director of Glover Empower Mentoring. And when I say that, I say it humbly because growing up, I didn't have a person in my life that I had an opportunity to go to and vent about some of the things that I was experiencing. So I held it in and it bottled up, and then it just exploded in ways that was not beneficial for me in my life. So the reason why gym even exists is for that purpose of having young people have an outlet to come and talk to individuals that care and are concerned about them. For us at gym right now, it's a crucial time because more than ever, our clients, our young people, our young adults, and our families are coming to us with needs that they haven't had met in a long time, and now they are under these dire circumstances for some support. And during this COVID pandemic, we seen that face turn into an ugly monster in terms of families needing support with housing, rental assistance, transportation, and we were just fortunate and lucky to be one of those organizations that our clients can depend on to help stand in the gap for them and meet those needs. So things have changed for us dramatically in the sense of how do we do outreach now? How do we work with our student population that are in the Kent School District, virtual learning? How do we make sure that the staff at GM, our team members, are their voices are being heard, as well as our outreach into the community? So change is inevitable, and we are here to learn and grow with the times that we're in. So for us, it's more about interfacing with the community and being there in the time of need.
Thank you. Does any of our panelists want to comment on anything you've heard so far? All right, so Jerry Chapman is with us from the Soul Law and the 120 Drum Ministry. You are here as a Native American, and we know that you don't represent all Native Americans, but you have a ministry within that community and you work there. So how are you seeing some of these things that we're talking about, and how do they relate to the historical challenges related to the tribes and the Native people?
Well, it just so happens, just recently, some of you have probably seen, the president came out and spoke about honoring the Indian country. And there were some artifacts that were returned to our nation that have been in the works for over 70 years. 70 years of back and forth to the countries of Finland and parts of Europe where our ancestors were dug up and brought back to Europe for museum purposes. And that was over 100 years ago. 120 years ago, this was done and then brought back and displayed. There was actually 18 full human skeletons that were returned. But see, the fight was because this is family. This is our community. This is important to us to restore this. So what happened here just recently, Finland, returning the artifacts out of a museum, were brought back to Colorado. And there were, I think, 26 tribes were a part of this return of families, if you will. And the administration felt that there needs to be honor. And the word honor in First Nation Native communities is everything. You honor the elders, you honor the tribal chair, you honor your husband and wife and family. It's just an important part. So the restoration for the tribes is now at a place where things can move on. So those are the types of things that I deal with as a believer of Yeshua, of Jesus. I go into our communities, and one of the first things, let's say a pre-believer will challenge me with is, I see you're bringing in white man's religion. I go, no. I'm a follower of the Creator, Jesus, and I tell my story, my testimony, if you will, and then that opens the doors. So our communities, and I can go clear across at least the West, the Idaho, Montana, into Canada where I was born, and into South America. And we're all dealing with things. We were in Indonesia a few years back, and we're going to see family and visit. But my son-in-law said, bring your drums. And I build and I do drum work. And we were invited to a church service, and I set up my native drums. It's like a little 3-piece kit. And I began to drum and partner in the ministry work. And then the pastor says, can you share a little bit of your story, testimony, so the people of Indonesia can get a better understanding? And I shared briefly some of the history, and you all know what that is. But there's also a lot of good that came with it. I mean, I'd be a floundering person out there if it wasn't for early missionaries that came with a good heart to share the gospel. So I shared my story. And then the Holy Spirit came upon me, and just to challenge, especially the elders of this church, to reconcile and to forgive these nations that took over your country. And it's familiar if you're in Australia. It doesn't matter where you go. Well, I said a prayer, I challenged this, and the whole front of the church was full, and the majority of them were elders who carried bitterness because of what had happened to them. And so that reconciling, no matter where we go, is a part of the message that we all bring that is needed. We need to share it. We need to express what God had given us. So the restoration of this event that just happened is one of the biggest things that's happened in Indian country in a long time. And the haters that are out there that hate government, hate whites and all that are going, what just happened? You see what's happening is God is opening doors and restoring things for all of us. And this is a teachable thing for all of us in every culture that is represented here. Everything that we're about is all about the heart and the love of the Father. So as my wife and I travel, and we were traveling until this pandemic came about. But what we're doing is sharing our story and our testimony, and the Holy Spirit is saying, just go be yourself somewhere else.
Thank you. Thank you. Pastor Andre is the pastor of Christ the King Ministry. He's also a psychologist and a businessman. Wears many hats. And Pastor Andre, Jerry brought up this thing about, some people seeing Christianity as a white man's religion. And you are very well versed with some of the differences between the African American church and the traditional church, and how Black people in America may see Christianity, or how we embrace it differently. Could you talk about some of those differences and some of the things that may be problematic as we try to talk about issues of faith and race and restoration?
Absolutely. Again, thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you for all of you that have given your time to communicate your expertise. I want to apologize for my delinquency or tardiness. It's one thing to talk about advocating for people. It's another thing to do it. We have a trucking company that is primarily geared at hiring Black and brown felons. And they had a moving job downtown Tacoma at a law firm, and I was there to encourage them prior to coming here. It's one thing to say you want to support, it's another thing to physically be there and be of support. And so I just appreciate your willingness to afford me that liberty. I think that some of us are aware that when we start talking faith and race in the faith community, the Church Universal, not just the white evangelical church, but the Church Universal has struggled with being complicit in some ways, some forms, some fashions. There are organizations like Black Lives Matter, whether you agree with the organization or not, that are saying that they are disappointed in the builder generation of African Americans, they're disappointed in the boomer generation of African Americans that are disappointed in the church. Universal, not just the black church. And so there's a history with the church. There's an unfortunate legacy of sin as it relates to what has happened historically that has not been addressed publicly and not necessarily been repented of. It's been legitimized by misinterpretation of Scripture, and it has been supported by silence. So if you're not familiar with the pre-Adamite view, the pre-Adamite view says that there was an existence of creation of some kind. Some would even go as far as to call it extraterrestrial creation. Prior to Adam, Adam being the first human, there were beings here before Adam is the pre-Adamite view. This view took place in the 16th century, 1560. This view was purported as late as 1880, and it states that this subhuman population is who Cain, who we can't find in Scripture where Cain's wife came from. Cain's wife came from this pre-Adam subhuman existence of people or beings. Those people or beings or subhuman were African or black, and therefore Cain, who is the villain of the Old Testament, married someone black, and that is the history being purported theologically concerning black people. And therefore, we become something less than human. And we see that being fleshed out in our written Constitution of 1787 that was ratified in 1789. And in 1789, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Paragraph 3, you will see that it says that when voting took place, there were only 3 African votes for every 5 African American people, suggesting that African Americans are something less than human, which dates back to the pre-Adamite view, and it's written in our present day Constitution. Excuse me, I said Article 1, it's Article 2, U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Paragraph 3. And that unfortunately begins the legacy of legitimizing sinful acts like slavery. Once Emancipation Proclamation came, legitimizing sinful acts and laws like Jim Crow. And our unfortunate present day situation where redlining has been relabeled as gentrification. And our 13% African American population in the U.S. now actually occupies 40+% of our prison population, known as the new Jim Crow. And so we have all these labels for our present day situation that the church has not taken ownership for its unwillingness to stand for righteousness and its inappropriate and unrighteous posture in support of slavery. In the book of 2 Chronicles, it says that the priest failed to lead, failed to adhere to truth, and the people therefore lived and walked in unrighteousness, and God allowed wickedness in the land. And so when those who are supposed to be our spiritual advisors and those who are supposed to be leading us and guiding us according to biblical truth choose to live unrighteously and choose to advocate for sin, then we wind up with wickedness that God allows. And that's what we're facing today. The church has failed to do its job of standing on truth and saying that when injustice takes place, it's inappropriate regardless of who suffers as a result of it. And so that has to do with why, for those who are African American in particular, when you go to the Elmina Castle in Ghana, West Africa, and you look at the initial place of imprisonment and kidnapping and raping, you find that there's a church built on the castle floor. So the Elmina Castle, slavery trade began in 1483 with the Portuguese. And in that castle, there is a church built not on the property. It's a part of the structure of the castle. So the governor over the castle, over the dungeon, over the first place where slave trade began, has had a spiral staircase that led to the women's dungeon. The women were packed in there like sardines. They were experiencing their menstrual and defecating on one another. And if you go there today, what looks to be like a quote-unquote concrete floor is actually defecation that has hardened and covered the brick that was there. And some 500 years later, you can still, it's a horrific smell when you're there. I was most recently there 6 months ago. So the governor had access to these women to do with whatever he wanted to do with once they were sprayed down by hose, to have all of what was on them sprayed off. And then the soldiers whose housing quarters were on the wall of the castle had second pick of the litter, if you will. And then the priest and those who worked in the church who were supposed to be bringing the truth of Christianity were the third group entitled to take advantage of these kidnapped women. That is the beginning of introduction of Christianity to the Ivory Coast, West Africa. And so the challenge of where we find ourselves suffering this frustration that has been unleashed through looting and whatever else in protest is because the church hasn't owned, the church hasn't taken culpability, the church hasn't demonstrated contrition for what it began to do. And then once slavery took place, of course, the means of separating husbands from wives and children from families does contribute to what we experience in our culture today with single parents and so on and so forth, and we don't own that. We just want to talk about what's immoral about these single parent situations. And so when we start talking about Christianity being white man's religion, I'll just close by saying that Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons, the etymology of the word Ham means dark, black, reddish, brown. Genesis chapter 2, starting at verse 16, Adam was formed from the dust of the earth. There's not a lot of white dust. So I'm not advocating for Adam being black. His name in the Hebrew language is reddish brown. The etymology suggests that he was a man of color. And Noah, as a descendant, 8 people survived the ark. One of those descendants, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham's name in the Hebrew language means black, reddish, brown. Japheth, bright white or fair. Shem, olive, yellow, dusky color, yellow. So our ethnicities have to be in the DNA of these individuals. Otherwise, we don't have what we have because we all come from the first human. The word hue means color. The first human is the first man of color. Adam had to be a man of color, whether you use the Hebrew language or whether you use the English language. So we've always known God. We weren't introduced to God when people began to rape and pillage and take advantage of us on our continent. And until the church is willing to repent of that and communicate its participation and its enhancement and legitimizing of the dehumanizing of people, we're not going to get out of our situation that we're in.
So Andre, those are some hard words sometimes for people to accept, right? But they're important for us to learn and to know that these things do exist. Just a little bit, just really shortly, if we don't take the time to understand this, and we're trying to find solutions to problems that existed for hundreds of years, how does that create a disconnect? Right? To me, it's like trying to build a house and starting from the roof and saying we don't have to worry about the foundation. We get to that later. Let's just get a good roof on, and maybe we can move from there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The fastest growing religion on the West Coast is the Black Hebrew Israelites. Black Hebrew Israelites. The reason that that's the fastest growing religion is that you have African Americans who don't hear from non-black and brown individuals that this history is actually factual. And because they don't hear that, and seemingly it's okay to know the God of Christianity and not speak against injustice, whereas some national evangelists have actually purported that there is no such thing as social justice in the Bible. So then they decide that if your God can allow you to be right with him and go to heaven but hate me, then I need to find a God that will allow me to do the same. So in the 60s, that became the Nation of Islam. And I'm not trying to offend anybody who's Islamic or anyone that actually practices the faith of Nation of Islam. I'm saying that the fact, one of the proven statistical growths of that particular religion came in the 60s during the season of Malcolm X and Dr. King Jr. because of what was happening with those who purported to be Christian not demonstrating the love or unconditional love of Christ. And we still have some of that happening today where you have believers naysaying the unrighteous killing of a George Floyd or asking for facts for the actual paralyzation of a Jacob Blake. And because there's no validation of the hurt, then there's no desire for people to want to ascribe to maybe what the truth might be concerning who the God of the Bible actually is, as opposed to the way in which he's being portrayed by those who suggest that they are his followers. And so if you don't have, first let me just say, validation doesn't require agreement. Validation does not require agreement. I don't have to agree with you to empathize or sympathize with the fact that I see that you're hurting. And an unwillingness to do that suggests that you don't have compassion or love, and therefore, why should I want to follow the God that you suggest is one that has agape, unconditional love? So if there is no foundation of contrition, remorse, and repentance, then we have nothing to build on.
So that's a great discussion that we probably need to continue also in other forums as well. Maybe our second or third forum, we can talk a little bit more about that. However, in my opinion, the Bible is clear that repentance is part of our relationship with God. And sometimes we tend to want to boil down repentance to my personal thing. Me and God are okay. But Jesus said, you and me can be okay, but what about you and John? What about you and that person? What about you and that person? So those kind of things are important to try to find solutions, if I think that's what you're trying to say. Chief Padilla, you are a leader in this community. You are the chief law enforcement officer, and we respect you for the work that you do and the hundreds of people, hundreds of good police officers who are doing a great job every day to help protect our communities, and we respect those good police officers. We don't expect you to speak for the entire law enforcement community, but maybe you can speak to some of your feelings about some of the things that you've seen going on in the nation, and then some of the things that you're doing as the chief of police in Kent, with the officers you work with the associations you're with, and some of the stuff that you're trying to changes to implement to ensure that, you can't ensure, but to do your best to reduce the potential for these things happening within our city.
Yes, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Pastor Ev, for this opportunity and to meet like this and talk about the issues in a way that I think is very positive that we don't always make time for. And I've just sitting here, I've already gained a great understanding of things that I've never heard of before, and they're swirling around in my mind, so I appreciate that. You know, reflecting back to the start of the conversation, as a police chief, when I turn on the news and I see, you know, the killing of George Floyd on TV, my reaction is multifaceted. My career pushes me to look at the situation quite differently, I think, than most people do. But at the same time, there is a human being here. There's a father, and there's a husband, and my heart sinks when I see these things. And to be honest, most recently, every time something like that happens, my visceral reaction is, man, can we just catch our breath? Can we just get a break on these things? Can this, like everyone else, I have the same reaction. Can this just stop right now? And so I start looking at that. I start thinking about the tragedy that is a loss of life regardless of the circumstance. And that whether or not, we will, in this uniform, will be seen as understanding that, appreciating that, and knowing that. I look at it in terms of also, is the officer okay? A lot of these encounters don't happen in a vacuum where the officer isn't uninjured or things of that nature. My brain goes there. My brain goes to, quite honestly, how am I going to protect my community if violence and destruction comes? How do we do that? How are we positioned to make sure that we can afford First Amendment rights to protest and keep it safe? And I think in the city of Kent, so far we've done a really good job on that. Okay, and then my brain starts going. And then my brain starts going to work. The questions that I ask are, what if this happens in Kent? What if one of my officers is in this situation? What can we learn? And so I try working my resources to gain as much information as we can, well beyond what's being portrayed in the media, because I need to know. I need to know as much as I can so that I can start working on what does that mean for Kent and the 128,000 people that I have the job to protect. What does that mean in terms of our culture in our police department and what we're doing to ensure that things like George Floyd would never happen here in the city of Kent? What's in place now in terms of culture? And I want to say this, I think one of the things that I would like to see have more conversation on is we're talking a lot about procedures and restrictions and budgets and all of these things. And to me, as a human being and as a leader of our department, we're missing the boat on the most impactful changes that have to occur in law enforcement. In law enforcement, it all starts with the hearts and minds and what I will call the culture of the organization. I can have the best procedures, equipment, I can have everything be top-notch, top to bottom, but if I have officers that don't have a heart for people and a heart to serve and compassion and care and feel something regardless of whether the use of force is handcuffing or whether there's a use of force that requires using a firearm, that has the compassion to understand that that is a failure, someone's life is cost, there are families impacted, and we don't want to do that in any way that we can. If we want to focus on where we can make the most effective change, I think it starts with the human beings that are wearing this uniform, and they are human beings. Okay, so those are the kind of conversations I have, and then we get to work. And so I lead with we start in a phenomenal place. In a city where you serve a community that speaks over 140 languages, you can't sit around and be deaf and blind to these issues. There's no way. There's no way to survive that, even if it's just a job that you're doing, but it's not. It's more than that. So we have been working, and I think sometimes in what I'm hearing, and this has been outstanding, is that when I lead with the conversation of, but we've been doing all of this, it raises defenses, right? I sound defensive, and so I'm acknowledging that and hearing that. What I intend to convey is we are open. We have the intellectual humility and the heart to understand there is a better way to do things. And so we are open to that. And so in an attempt to display all the things we have been working on, I think we come across defensive, but I want you to know what I mean to say is we're on it. What else can we do?
So, Chief, we're going to give you a chance too later to talk. If you can do that now or take it later to talk about some of the things that you're doing, the performance measures and stuff like that in the community as well.
Thank you. I didn't want to take up too much airtime.
No, go ahead.
Because there's great conversation to be had. So what I will say is this. This is going to sound awkward, but one of the best things that happened for us in the city of Kent was watching most recently what happened in Ferguson. And I've got to give credit to my predecessor, Ken Thomas. And that was a kick in the butt right away. And we started to get into work, and it hasn't been 9 years, but we set up a diversity task force 9 years ago. And we've been listening to members of our community, from the faith-based organizations, people of color, people in this room, in the audience serve on that task force. So we've been listening and working for years on that. Additionally, we got to work by looking at President Obama's 21st century policing. What was nice about that is because we have a culture where we don't sit back and wait for things to be compelled upon us. We try to go out and recognize what our community needs in a proactive way. Almost 90% of the 21st century policing initiatives were already being enacted. Going back, we were the first municipality in Washington to bring up fair and impartial policing. And we brought our community leaders in. We spent a significant amount of money training everyone from our city council members to our faith-based community members to our command staff. And really for the first time, and this is years ago, this is 7 years ago, looked at the issue of implicit bias that is a human condition. We got to work on and have been involved in diversity task force in terms of cultural competencies. We moved away from categorical training where we would bring in one category and went to more of a universal thing. So we've been doing all these things. Most recently, and to piggyback on what Councilmember Fincher said, we've got another kick in the butt. This is another charge. This is probably in the last 3 months my 10th forum for discussion, and I love it. Because one of the challenges is to get the information about what's going on. We have recently stood up a commander position, so someone that sits at the highest ranks in the department who is assigned for race and equity issues in the department. That is intertwined with the mayor's team that is getting established and the new manager that's coming, but we're already rolling. We have gone back and looked at some of the national policies like 8 That Can't Wait. And where we were missing, we were in line with most of that. Where we're missing was written policy. We have now 5 new draft policies that are coming out that we've given to our diversity task force for input from the community. We've given to the city council for input, and we're putting our policies out there for people to see. You can get on our website right now and click on our policies and read them yourself. That's a change that came recently, right, for transparency. We have several initiatives coming. There will be a resolution coming that we helped put together that will be announced in full in the next city council meeting. I'm missing a lot of things, but we have been working really hard. And I want to say we've moved to network further and deeper than we have before, moving to the Cultural Communities Board, including them on monthly meetings now. And so it's been a lot of work.
We've got your dashboard up if you want to refer to it behind you.
Oh, okay. There you go. They can't wait. Yes. And a lot of it has been getting our message out that we are responsive and we are listening. We launched our website. We put the Kent PD Way, which has videos of there. I'm in there. And let me just say I am not a fan of being on video, but it's part of the job. And many more. Our social media has been ramped up so we can communicate and receive information. We have a deluge of emails and questions that we are turning around on. And so it's been a lot of work that way. There's also been work to go back to our officers and reassure them and reinforce the things that we want them to see. Remind them that our mission is about serving with compassion. Mm-hmm. Reminding that we have values of inclusion and acceptance, and reminding them that we do it our way, and keeping them motivated to keep doing the job, because it's tough right now for them. So there's been a lot going on.
Thank you, Chief. And you can see the 8 Can't Wait here in the auditorium. You can see it on the screen. The Chief's website is called the Kent PD Way, and you can look that up at any time you want to see what they're doing, their measures. And I just want to say this, no matter what you think about the police, no matter what you think about what's going on in our community, our police serve a purpose, and we need to respect them. We need to respect the job that they're doing. We need to respect the people who are willing to stand in the gap for us. That doesn't mean we always agree with everything that happens, but they're willing to go into places where most of us are not. They have families like we do, they have children like we do, and they're human beings like we are, and Yes, we need to have those tough discussions when the time comes, and the chief's not afraid to have those tough discussions, but we also need to remember that our police officers are people as well, and they have families as well. So Kedrick, I know you got to go pretty soon, so I want to ask you this question: what are some of the things that we can do to help reduce the school to prison pipeline that exists in this country? And you know, some people that may be the first time you've heard it, but what's your familiarity with that? And is that something that you focus on in your organization, or you just do it inherent? The results of what you do are inherent in helping break that pipeline.
Wow. That's a topic that we can sit here and discuss all day, dialogue on all day. I'm one to be open and transparent, so I don't think this would come to a shocker for most of you, and if it does, my apologies, but I'm a product of the school to prison pipeline. When I was growing up in Mississippi, I didn't have a great support system in terms of education, so I didn't think education was important, which led me to not finishing high school or not even attending high school. So when I talk to my young people and they ask, how was your experience in high school? I don't have one to share it with them. Which is a shocker to them for me being in the position that I'm in. But when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, some of the things that the organization that I steward is doing right now is opportunities for young people to have next chances instead of second chances, because we all fall short, and there's always an opportunity for us to do something better the next time around. So we have programs like our Theft 3 and Mall Diversion Program and South Center in partnership with Tukwila Police Department and the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office and the King County Public Defense Office. And where if a young person is caught shoplifting, instead of them going into the juvenile justice system, they are now being given back to the community and community partnerships, where they no longer have to go in front of a judge to answer for the quote-unquote crime that they committed, but by giving them back to the community and community-based organizations, it allows us to get to the root issue of the problem and talk about some of the things that stem to them leading up to making that decision. For a lot of our young people, life isn't fair. They come from broken homes, they come from single-parent households, and oftentimes they're not. Those single parents are elder people like grandmothers and uncles and aunts, because you know, for whatever reason it may be, parents are not in their lives. So we have to stop looking at the issue or the why the young person committed a crime or making the decision that they are, and be able to talk to them and listen to them. I think right now what's taking place in our nation in terms of young people being pushed into the system at an early age is very detrimental to our society, because I look around the room and we're all over the age of 21, and a lot of us have more good years in front of us than behind us. So you have to think about who's going to carry on the legacy of us after we are no longer here. And we have to think about our youth and our young adults right now, because those are the people that's going to carry the traditions on. Those are the people that's going to pay taxes. Those are the people that's going to pay into your retirement. So if we continue to not educate them properly and penalize them for the decisions that they make by incarceration, whether that be behind bars or incarcerated in their homes and communities by home detention monitoring, paying fees and fines and penalties and things like that, we're not giving our nation, we're not giving ourselves opportunity to see what can become of these young people. So I think we have to take our blinders off in a way and be more sympathetic to some of the issues that our young people are facing. And I'm not saying we don't have to hold them accountable. We should, and that's some of the things that we're working on at GM, is holding young people accountable, but not blaming them for the decisions and the mistakes that they made. There's a lot of data that's floating around in terms of our students of color not graduating at the same rate of their peers. There's a lot of data that's floating around that's saying that our city and the city of Kent is the second, or some would say the third most leading referral agency to the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. And for the organization that I lead, we want to go in and be a disruptor to that by providing programs that are timely and relevant and that are culturally aware of some of the issues that our young people face. So when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, it's more deeper than just young people not having access to opportunities, but providing that access for them right now in this present day.
Yes. You know, so as Pastor Andre spoke about in his introduction, right, it's one thing to talk about it, that we want to see changes happen, and it's another thing to step up and do it, and to put it into practice. And I think that's where you're headed with your organization. We appreciate that work. Amen. You are the youngest among us today, and you came to this country from another continent, and you quickly assimilated into the community. You graduated from Kent Meridian High School, one of the most diverse high schools. Now you're a student at Northwest University in Kirkland. So can you give us your perspective on some of the challenges that young people face in this community today?
Yes, can you guys hear me? So my name is Amay, he already said it. He was actually my school counselor. He was a great one, so. I would say that, like just coming from Kent Meridian High School, like coming from a different country and coming to Kent Meridian High School was never an experience that, like, when you're back home, you thought high school was gonna look like, because how, like, you watch, like, Disney Channel, like, you see, like, things were just so well in school, you know, like, everybody have a car, everybody have, like, it looks like everybody was so good in school, you know, and just going to Kent Meridian and seeing, like, a lot of time, a lot of us, not many of us go to college. Not many of us have access to scholarships. The reason why we don't go to college is because a lot of us do not have that access to go to college. I mean, as a refugee coming from a country where I did not speak English, I don't think I had a lot of opportunity that was offered for me. And there probably were, but if you come from a family where you're first gen, the parents don't know how you can reach out to those people. So a lot of students there's not a lot of people don't reach out to minority students to how to apply for school and how to have like just like a better life in general. So I've seen a lot of my friends struggling with. It breaks my heart that I have the opportunity to go to school and for a while, but it wasn't easy for me to even get there too. And it's like, wow, like if I'm only one of those that goes, how about many of others that are very smart students? They can do anything that I can do in college, even better than me, but just like not seeing them pursuing the dream because of the lack of opportunity that we have here in our schools, whereas like school like Kent Lake had like better opportunity in the same school district. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Dr. Newby, you also represent the education institutions, educational arm of our discussion today. Could you talk a little bit about how you see college students today processing all the information we're talking about and issues of faith and race and ministry and just helping them traverse this path, right, towards becoming all that they can be?
Thank you for the invitation to participate in this town hall and meeting. And I'm learning so much once again. Learning is critical. Education is critical. When we're dealing with the notion of race, faith, and education, how do we populate higher education? We're at 6% of the human population. Actually, secures a Bachelor of Arts degree, somewhere between 6 to 8%. We need to increase that tremendously and quickly.
Yes, right.
Because when we learn, when we're educated, we become more human. And that's a spiritual issue because it's about discipleship. Educating is discipleship. Students today are stressed because of the price of higher education. They are also stressed coming out, finishing their degrees with debt. We have to rethink our systems of how to educate, disciple, and equip human beings. Everyone is not supposed to have a 4-year education, but everyone should have a lifelong education, and we need to think about how we're going to diversify our systems of equipping and educating others without bias and with full equity under the auspices of God, because we're about bringing the kingdom of God to heaven. Kingdom of God from heaven to earth. So these are spiritual issues. Bottom line is finances. We have to figure out how to create a just economic system that will allow people to secure education. And I think the way it happens is that you have to simply increase the pool. You have to increase the access.
Right.
Now, with technology and apps available, we need to really look at our biases and our preferences to how we want to equip, how we want to educate, and who we really want to educate. See, I think the issue is, do we really want human beings to learn? And there are systems in play that say no, because we want to increase the population, increase a larger population to this form of enslavement, to debt. Because if we can just keep them tied up financially, then they got to work. But there is something about this idea of ethics and a work ethic that I think comes into play in a very human way, that when folks are educated. Last but not least, I think the church needs to consider its responsibility toward discipling and equipping and coming alongside higher education so that we can expand the pool, so that we can continue to educate more folks, so that we're populating the kingdom of heaven and depopulating hell, because ignorance, in a sense, is a form of hell. So let's think about these ideas. We can talk about this for hours and hours, but what I see students, they're wanting to learn, they're wanting to figure out this race thing, especially some white students on the West Coast that I see. Black students, they've already known us there. They've already seen the bias. It's been a struggle for them to get in. But what we have to do, we have to expand our borders, expand our boundaries, and make sure that we are teaching and preaching righteousness and radical racial reconciliation.
Thank you, Dr. Newby. You know that, yeah, you were right. The economics of education could be an entire topic because it's a subset of our larger economic system, which was not originally established to benefit everyone, right? And sometimes that's hard for some people to hear as well. But if you go back and look at the history of this country, and we're talking about the United States of America now, other countries could be different, and other countries are similar. The economic system in this country was not set up to benefit everyone. It was set up to benefit certain people above the other. And we see that going through the education system, where only certain people went to school, only certain people's children went to school. And now we're here in the 20th, 21st century, and we're talking about education for everyone, but however, we haven't changed the pillars of the system. So therefore, even though we say education for everyone, our system has barriers preventing that for everyone. And we all know, and the government, you know, this thing about student loans, you know, having some person go to college and come out of college with $80,000 in student loans is criminal. That is tying up a person for the next 10 to 15 years of their life, paying debts back to banks, and trying to build themselves up. So yeah, we need to talk about that and how we can get more people in there.
Brother Moderator, I just might add this 10-second here. SPU, Seattle Pacific University, in about a week, is going to announce a significant change to address that issue.
Thank you. So let's switch our discussion now a little bit towards other nonprofit and talk about our immigrant community and our refugee community. And Chitra Hanstead represents the World Relief Seattle. And Chitra, can we talk a little bit about how legislation that is impacting resettlement agencies like World Relief, and can you explain to us some of the things that are going on that some people may not be fully aware of?
Sure. Thank you for having me this morning. Really privileged to be here. So for the last 4 years with this administration, we've seen a precipitous decline in the number of refugees allowed to come into this country. So under President Obama's last presidential determination, he set the number of refugees allowed into the country at 110,000. This past year, the administration set it at 18,000. So you can see how quickly the numbers have gone down. We have had to shut 10 of our offices across the country at World Relief. And that's not just World Relief, it's every resettlement agency out there. There's 9 voluntary agencies that do resettlement in the United States. So more than once, I started the same day as President Trump, and more than once in the last 4 years, our staff has literally been on its knees and praying because of an existential crisis, not knowing if we'd be around. And God has been faithful time and time again. But this whole thing of intersectionality of what we're talking about, racial justice, and the work that we do, it's really fascinating because Washington State last year was the second state in the country for refugee resettlement. We came behind Texas and came ahead of New York and California. So Washington State is a very welcoming state. But what was interesting to me, the racial balance of who we're resettling has changed quite a bit since the days that Emma and her family came through. The largest population that we're resettling at World Relief right now is Ukrainian, and the second is Afghani. And so the racial makeup has changed quite a bit in who we're resettling. And there's definitely intersectionality about racial reconciliation because Emma was interning with us this past year, and we had an amazing conversation. So I usually get the privilege of talking to our interns, and we were talking about race, and she said, Ms. Hanstead, you guys do this, we do something called cultural orientation. She said, you need to do a cultural orientation for us who come from African countries about what it means to be Black in America, because nobody told us what that meant. And it was, you know, we were talking about these things, and it's true. The trajectory of folks that come in who are Caucasian is very different from those who come in with other, who are people of color. And one other thing I'll add, That's just, I've been doing this kind of work for going on almost 35 years, and here and overseas. And the racial element is prevalent all over the world. And when I was I don't know if you guys heard on the news that there was a camp on Lesbos Island, a refugee camp that burned down. I was in that camp that's in Moira, and most of the folks in there were Black and brown people. And we have the prison industrial complex here in the United States, but we're putting Black and brown people behind bars all over the world. And there were just these beautiful little children. I had a UN badge on, and all these Black and brown children started to gather around me, and they kept pointing at my badge and saying, why are you, you look like us, why are you on that side? Because mostly it was people that didn't look like me that were in the UN program and the UNHCR. And they didn't even speak each other's language, but they kept saying, you Ind? And I said, yes, I'm Indian. And they said that one of them just started singing this Bollywood song. And I didn't know Bollywood was like the great uniter, And they all started singing that song, and we were doing Bollywood dances in the middle of the camp. But what Kendrick said just really highlighted something for me. This is our future. There's almost 56 million folks that are living like this, and mostly Black and brown. And if you look at even the journey of people that come from Africa versus Syria, for example, what this pastor, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Pastor Andre, right? What he talked about in Ghana, those camps are still alive and well. There are African women, when they start their journey as refugees, I sat in the camp and heard the stories of moms, how they would sacrifice their own bodies so their babies don't get raped. And this is still going on, and there are camps where Black and brown people are treated so much worse than refugees from other parts of the world. So race does. When we talk about this thing about are we not one, I would say we're not one. We are one in Christ, right? But we're not one in the way the world treats us. And it breaks my heart. But at World Relief, we're trying so hard to change the systems and change the economic realities for people of color. We need to work on the systems, on the root causes. We can't just say, hey, let's sing Kumbaya and let's get on with it. We can't. We've got to fix the foundation. So thank you for having me.
Luis, you work also with World Relief, but you work mainly in the detention center ministries, and the detention centers have also been in the news very much. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there and the impact that you're making? What are some of the things you are trying to do in the detention centers to help bring some relief and some hope to people who are there?
Hi everyone, I am Jose Luis, like they say. I am from Honduras, and I work with the immigrants for 12 years and a half, because I worked before with minors, the minor reunification, and now I'm working with the World Relief and the other part for the immigrants in detention. So there is I don't know, the facilities in Tacoma, they can hold 1,575 people there, and it's coming around the world. We are working in the Detention Center Ministry in 2004, when they were in downtown Seattle, and then they moved, because immigration, yes, like the facility is a big business, because the government pay for each bed more than $100 per day. If the goal for 2020 for the government was 54,000 people per day. This was being locker. But the pandemic changed all the plans. Now this is a different. So what we are doing, when World Relief start working with the detention center is because they have one case in downtown. They found Chinese people in the ship container. They died there, and the immigration, they didn't talk in Mandarin or Chinese, and the Chinese, they didn't speak English. This is the reason how they start the connection, because the former director said, we can help, and they went to look for the volunteers, and they speak Mandarin, and they made the connection. But so from this group, they found that three, I think, and the other, they start helping and doing. They discovered that if we had volunteer, I say accompany to the detainee in this process of detention, because this is helpful a lot, because when people see like the immigrant, they are not criminal. Immigrants is, I am immigrants too, I am from Honduras, is all, I think, three reasons that people immigrate from their country. One is a poverty. Second is a violence. It's a lot of violence in the country. They can't live there. And the other is they are search for the new opportunities. This is the other. So in immigration, immigrate is a human right too. If I didn't choose born in Honduras, but I can decide where can I live. I didn't choose my family, but I can decide how can I have better life in future. So this is the reason people immigrate, say, I can't live in this country. Like I say, like in Honduras, you hear about the caravans the last year. 1,000 people leave from the country because the poverty, the violence, people say, I can't live here. I prefer die in the way than die here in this country. So we can take that decision. So when they come into the border, there is three groups is in the detention center, how they finish there. I can talk more about Tacoma, because this is, I go in Tacoma. Three groups. One is they're crossing the border without permission. This is one. Everybody, if they go to the embassy in the country for apply for the visa, they deny. And they say, okay, I can prefer going, I can walk and cross the border without permission. This is one. And then they bring to Tacoma when this full, the facilities in South. There is more than 127 facilities in the United States. It's not just, and here in the Northwest, just is Tacoma. They give service to Washington, Idaho, Alaska, and Oregon. The people they cut in this area, they finish there. So this is one group, they coming from South. When it's full, the facilities in California and Texas. Then this another group is when they cut here in this forest state, especially when they went to the court or something happened, and they discovered they don't have documents for be in United States. They finish there and they can fight in the case when they are in detention. And the other group is when they coming legal to United States. They come in legal, but the visa expired. The time for being United States expired, and they didn't release. They didn't leave from the country. So this is another. So our job is provide, we say, the pastoral care, because we discover when people read and pray, they have more hope. They have more hope, because when they read the Bible and found from Genesis to Revelation what God talked about the immigrant, what God talked about how care to the immigrants. So, and this is one. And the other is we have a worship service inside the weekend. So singer is prevents for depression, because if they singer, they can singer is in group. This prevents for depression, because they say, okay, I am here, God give me hope, I have this group, and they talk. So the last year we finished around 18 Bible study group, small group, they leader the same detainee, they have the leader. So this helps a lot, because they can hear hope, and they can talk more, and the other is we support from outside. This is my job, more from outside, doing the window visits. We put the volunteer with the detainee together. We match, and they can continue. The volunteer can follow for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. We have one case there for he's from Mozambique. He was for 4 years in detention, just for immigrants, for being immigrant. 4 years. The volunteer stayed with him for 4 years, going every other week for visit the detainee. So for this detainee, they can have more hope and say, okay, I can support more this situation here because somebody's with me. This is one, the window visit. The other we have is a correspondent. We can write. I have volunteer from Bellevue to Olympia. This is and they can write. And the other is we support for we say is for deportation because this is hard. When they lost the case, they know they back their country. So the job is we do the crisis intervention and we say the transitional plan. Because when we show the detainee, okay, you have more options, more than the United States. The world has more than 197 countries. There is more. It's a lot. The world is so big. It's not just United States. So when we work and make the picture, they can say, oh yeah, I didn't think it. For example, for the Mexicans, say, can I go to Europe? Yeah, you can go. It's easy to go for you. Oh, really? Yeah. So this is when we make more opportunity. And we have the other program we start, this is another college working. We say that for the seeking asylum, this is a great program that World Relief doing because when they release, especially more asylum coming from Africa, and they don't have connection in the United States. They fled for anything, and they didn't qualify maybe for being refugee, but they finish here. So this program that World Relief helping a lot with the housing, food, it's a lot. This is a full program. It's helping a lot. So this is we are doing. We are doing the legal service. We are not doing because there is another organization they are doing legal service. But this is. I think I talk too much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's good. Yeah, thank you very much, Jose. And I think you made an important point. Everybody in the detention center is not a criminal. Some people are just put there because that's where they send them. Send them there. Go ahead, Chief.
So I get a lot of questions on what the Kent Police Department, City of Kent's policy is on immigration. You know, are we a sanctuary city? Where are we at on this? And I want to start by saying, and I've said it a lot of times, in the City of Kent, it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, where you come from. Your immigration status is not our business, and we're not concerned. We believe that that is a federal law enforcement function to look at that. And so we literally have a policy that prohibits researching someone's immigration status in our country as a normal course of action. That said, we follow the law, and there are laws that require that access to our booking list at our jail. That includes from ICE. And so they call, and sometimes they will put a request for somebody that's in our jail, per se. And what we do is we say, okay, they're getting released by us for whatever charges we have them on this date and time. If you want them, come and get them. We don't deliver them, we don't do anything, but the law requires us to let them know. And what we found before we moved to this policy was somewhere in the ballpark of 83%. We weren't getting pickups on detainees. And we were running the risk of housing people that were done with being in jail for whatever, say DUI or assault or whatever, and then they were sitting and waiting for ICE to show up to take them. So we fixed that. We don't do that. They don't stay 1 second longer than anything they have to be accountable for in our local system, okay? So, but the law requires that we do that, and so sometimes ICE comes, sometimes they don't. Most times I'll be honest, they do not. There is one exception, and I want to make this clear because it's a balance. There isn't an absolute one way or the other on this issue, and take all politics aside. I have a duty to protect 128,000 plus everybody else that comes here and visits. So there's one exception to the rule. If you are a violent criminal offender, and we have cartel level drug trafficking organizations and other things that are in our city, If you are in that category of a violent offender, I will leverage your immigration status to get you to protect our community, keep us safe. That is the one exception. Other than that, we're not that.
Thank you, Chief, for making that distinction. Tamina, you represent the resiliency programs at World Relief. Could you explain to us what are resiliency programs, and then how do those benefit people in our community?
So the word resiliency, so I am here as an immigrant as well, and thank you today for having us, and thank you for moderating, honey. I'm married to that man. But all of us have inherent resiliency, and especially those people who have been displaced, whether you've chosen to move from one country to another, or violence and other issues like refugee and asylum seekers have been displaced not because they wanted to, but as Jose Luis explained, what happens is we have gifts and abilities and so many things to give. Often what happens in a new country is if you don't know the language of that country, you're not valued as someone who has anything to offer or to give. And the inherent resiliency that we bring, you have met Eme. I believe she's a world changer. But if we discounted Eme, or we discounted Tamina, or we discounted Jose Luis because our English wasn't perfect, by the way, I've been practicing all this time just to speak to you, that if your English is not perfect, if that's the only barrier that we see when we encounter someone, often that you see that as a trajectory of not letting someone flourish. And so the resiliency programs through World Relief has been to look at really what people have to offer to make a thriving community, and we all have something to offer. And we see that fall across racial lines, oftentimes, and Chitra alluded to that a little bit. And I've been doing this work for a very long time, and often when you see, let's say, a family arrive from a country like Ukraine or Moldova or Croatia in the early days during the war in Serbia, and their trajectory in a 5-year period, their assimilation and what can happen to them because of the color of their skin in this country is 100% different than somebody who comes and looks like me or looks like Eme. If you check on them 5 years later, it's a different story, and it falls along access barriers and what they have access to and what opportunities are offered. And it's simply a matter of how the system is set up. And so for us to really work on that is to challenge things and challenge policy and challenge ideas of how can we work together to create access that's equitable so people can thrive, and their inherent resiliency, what has brought them to a new place so that they can thrive in that new place. The skills that they bring, the abilities that they bring can really come forth. And that diversity is what will make this community of Kent and other communities like us really, truly thrive. And I'll give you a quick example. The garden, for those of you who are physically here, I hope you get the chance to walk through this partnership with Hillside Church and World Relief. We're able to depave a parking lot and put in a garden where currently people from 23 different countries are growing food that you cannot grow and find. You can't find in the grocery stores readily, right? So you're able to grow it here. And here's the beauty of diversity. A lot of times, if you grow the same things, the soil is depleted. If you grow, and God made it this way, if you keep growing the same old thing, the nutrients in the soil goes away, and you can't keep doing that. You have to keep adding amendments, and bacteria and other things will grow in the soil. But the beauty of diversity, when you have all these different countries growing food that's very different right next to each other, guess what? That's automatic good news for the soil, because not everybody from different countries grow the exact same thing. And that is a good thing for the soil, and we can switch plots, and you will see that at work. And that's how God intended it. And when we really celebrate that and work together and really build up the inherent resiliency that we all bring, we have a better, stronger, thriving community. And that's what we're hoping for.
So we have seen, I hope you're seeing some of the connections here. There are people from a whole bunch of different groups, but I hope you're seeing the connections with how we're all dealing with people. By the way, if you're online and you want to ask a question, you can put it, if you're on Facebook, you can put it in the chat box. And if you're here and you want to ask a question, we'll give you an opportunity in a minute. So if you see me looking at my phone, it's not that I'm texting my friends. We're actually talking to each other upstairs, and I'm watching over there. That's why I keep looking back to see if there's anything coming over there. So I'm not distracted. We're just keeping track of what's going on in multiple mediums at the same time. So I think COVID brought out to us, if anybody is having any problems making the connection, COVID brought out to us how we're connected. We see problems with healthcare, we see problems with housing, we've seen problems with homelessness, we've seen problems begin to prop up. And obviously, these didn't start in March 2020. Homelessness didn't start in March 2020. The disparities I read in the newspaper the other day, that children who are from black and brown families are dying at a higher rate from COVID than any other group. Shows us that our community is connected in ways that we may not normally think about. So my question for the panel is, what things are you doing as we see these things, to try to bring together the groups, as we've seen here, to try to help solve some of these problems, because no one person can solve them. And that question is for anyone who wants to answer. Go ahead, Mayor.
I would love to start with that. So I want to go back in history a little ways, a few years, and talk about some conversations that were happening in Kent amongst all of our different service groups. So I mean Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions Club, faith-based organizations, all of those things. I see Brenda Farwell here in the audience. It was part of those conversations. We sat down at a table and said, you know, we're all doing work in this community. We're all doing it in different ways. And we all have sort of like our territories, right? One group works on this thing and one group works on this other thing. And we all know that when we come together, we're more powerful. Our resources expand. We can do greater things together than in these silos. And we spent a couple years talking about how do we undo this? And there was always this commitment to let's figure it out. COVID came to Kent and it figured it out for us. I have never seen a community come together, and it's our service clubs, our faith-based organizations, and it's people from every faith that's represented in the city of Kent. It's from every race, ethnicity. It didn't matter. All of a sudden, there was this combined need in our community, and it's centered around food. And everybody knows, right, food is the big thing that brings us all together. When you want to sit down with somebody, you sit down over a meal. But there was a realization that there was a very large part of our community that didn't have access to food. Once COVID hit and they were quarantined, they lost their jobs, things went away, that we had people that didn't have access to food. Many, many things fell into place. Some of it, I believe, 100% by the grace of God, some of it by just the sheer tenacity of the people involved. And over the last 6 months, our community, not one organization, not two organizations, all of them came together, and we have been able to take care of our city and feed each other and fellowship in a way that I don't think any of us could have imagined pre-COVID. We have all of our groups working together, that we've all been able to play a part in this, and it's been rocky and bumpy, and some of that territory comes out, and we've figured out how to do it, and I could not be prouder of what this city has done. We have this hashtag, right? It's sort of this line that we've been using in Kent for a while, and it says, "We are Kent." And initially it was just like something fun. We had it on bumper stickers. We did this. It is become the words that I use every single day because we are Kent, right? We're not multiple different groups. We're not people from different places. We're a community that has taken care of each other, and we've been able to prove that. And I am so extremely proud of that work that's been done in our city. And it really did bring us all so much closer together.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hey, Jerry, have you seen these same kind of effects in the Native communities and some of the things that may be happening to help bring some relief there in the Native communities as well?
Well, where we live, the closest Native community we have is the Cowlitz Indian tribe, and we live in Cowlitz County. And I try to monitor what goes on. And years ago, I aggressively approached Cowlitz to say, my family lives in British Columbia across the border, and I need to connect with a family. And Cowlitz, over time, at a distance for a while, took us in and slowly embraced us. And over time, we began to serve as followers of Jesus. We wanted to do our part and not slap them alongside the head with the Bible, but just serve them and love them. And over time, we have become a family in that community, along with the coastal people. We travel quite a bit, regionally, so we're connecting with the Chinook Nation, Chehalis, Tahola, all the way up into Canada. And so we do our best to stay connected. I'm seeing things from the Cowlitz families where they're so shut in that they're actually they have more opportunities to serve their community. As far as the elders that are shut in, we have a housing development for elders there where they are served more, they're bused more, they're fed better, in some cases. They're well cared for. But one of the focuses I feel strong about, and sitting alongside me, I usually don't go anywhere without it, is my hand drum. And worship is a powerful thing. Songs are a powerful thing. And for tribal people, and I can speak for all of us here, I would imagine, songs are healing. And in these times, we need to look for strength. And songs bring strength. I remember ministering somewhere out, and they weren't visited much. And, to us as singers and musicians, we become accustomed to what we do. But when someone approaches you at the end of a session, and this is what this young boy said. He said, "Thank you for singing to us." And that just tells me, I grew up with mother singing, grandmother singing, and there's a healing aspect that First Nations crave. We crave the sound of the drum. We crave the unity of the powwow, of those sorts of things. In Indian country, you were right about food bringing. That's so right on. And you start with that. And so taking care of this, I've researched way back as far as I could research. And one of the key things that elders and communities talk about in those early writings is how they took care of this. When you serve someone and you honor them and you feed them, bring them into your home, that's a restoration that's needed. And so I'll close with this, just saying, we spend time in our church fellowship. We haven't been in our building in a long time. So we have church services somewhere different every weekend. And we call it free range. And what happens out there is we're doing worship and we're doing songs, and someone is jogging who just moves into our community for a few months, and she stops and listens, and then she comes asking questions. What are you folks doing? Well, this is a fellowship. We worship God, and we're here to just worship and praise Him. And her arms went up, and she goes, I found a place to gather. So since then, she's been coming every Sunday, or our prayer meetings and whatnot. But all that to say, worship has a way to heal our community. If we can sing our songs, if we can serve in any capacity. Outside of our church, we have a building right behind our wall, and that's our community house, the homeless, single moms and children. And across the street, we have more ministry over there. And we're busy. When we're not calling them homeless, we're calling them our street family.
Thank you. Chitra, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I came out here when Tamina and the resiliency team was doing the food distribution. And there was, in this parking lot, I don't know if any of you came out, there were like 850 cars lined up to get food. And I'd look inside the cars, and what I noticed were that it was mostly black and brown families in that line. And I walked away that day back to my car. I was parked like 3 streets down, and just, I don't know, just broken. And I called the leadership team together, and I said, you guys, we needed to step into this moment of relief, but we really need to lean into development. And the next time crisis hits, it's always our folks that are in those lines. I said, the next time crisis hits, I want them to be able to go to the store and buy their own dang food, you know? And so what Tamina and several others said, it's like, we need to lean into wealth creation and equalizing opportunity for our folks. I mean, when in the United States, you look at mass incarceration, it's for African Americans, it's 5 times the rate of whites in this country. In some, I learned that in some states, it's 10 times the rate of whites for African Americans. And I thought those states would be in the South, but they're actually Iowa, Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, and Wisconsin, which is really interesting. And for a black child, they have 5 times the rate of incarceration as their white peers. There is disparity, and the pandemic definitely exposed those, but we need to really look at what Kendrick said about access to education, access to capital, access to networks, and that's something for immigrants. They come here without capital, without networks. And how do we give them access to opportunity? Equity is very different from equality, right? Like somebody said, equality is being asked to the dance, like getting an invitation to go to the dance, but equity is actually saying, hey, do you want to dance with me? And getting you off the chair, right? So we really want to give people the chance to dance at World Relief, and that's something we're going to be starting to do. Entrepreneurship. We're going to be doing small business support for immigrant-run businesses and BIPOC-run businesses. Tamina already did a website. Do you know that a lot of immigrant and BIPOC-run businesses don't have websites, which is a main way of getting more folks into their businesses. So she did a web development seminar, and we had several people show up for that. So anyway, I really think that we need to, as organizations that are run by the people that we serve, there's very few of us. There's only, I think, 17% of people in my role, in the executive role, are people of color. And so for those of us that are doing this work, we really need to push into development and get away from relief. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
So Pastor Andre, I want to ask you this question of what are some of the things you believe, what you have been doing, and then other things that you think we can do to help increase the diversity of people at the table in bringing about some of the changes in community that we desire? Because like Chitra said, many of these organizations and stuff are not led by people of color and don't have lots of people of color in their boards, but you are doing some innovative things, you're involved in the community. What are some of the things you could share with us?
Well, we have some municipalities represented here today, and I live in the city of Federal Way, and we had the same forum, and the blessing is that we have individuals coming together to create a nonprofit organization for the purpose of the three things that have been mentioned here: economic empowerment for those who are Black and brown, judicial diversion for those who face nonviolent and non-felony charges, and then that third one is mentoring or discipleship that has long-term effects. So it would be from junior high till they actually finish high school. And so that's not just a faith-based thing. It's not just a nonprofit thing. It's not just the community organizations of Kiwanis and so on and so forth. But it's every entity in the community that is working towards doing something, moving from the silo effect to actually coming together collectively, as was mentioned, and saying this is what we're doing. We have a lot of duplication taking place, and a lot of the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. And so MOU has been created, Memorandum of Understanding, with 21 different organizations in the city, all of which were serving Black and brown individuals in some form or some fashion. Some that are populated with the dominant culture, and people don't know what they're doing, but they're willing to do something. And then being able to take those individuals that find themselves in the system, in our court system, we have over 300 individuals facing some kind of criminal charge a week. I thought that number was large to me.
That's large.
But now, because of this organization, because of this gathering, you now have those individuals who have resources, trade unions, trade schools, all of these entities coming together to say, how can we help create economic empowerment, judicial diversion, and mentoring discipleship? And so I'm excited about the unfortunate catalyst to all of this, what it has created in the community as it relates to recognizing that when you don't have diversity on your board and you don't have diversity at the executive level, then you probably aren't going to have impact for those who suffer the greatest need in your community.
Thank you.
So,
thank you. So unfortunately, we are running out of time, but one question came in for the chief. And chief, this question is, some of the police involved in taking the lives of Black lives had a previous record of mistreatment. They move on and hire on in another community. What is the policy of Kent Police in hiring officers with previous records of mistreatment? Should there be a no tolerance policy?
Absolutely, and we don't. So there's a lot of discussion about a national registry that would track law enforcement officers that they move from one organization to the other, and I don't have any issue with that. I want it to be done in the right way, though. We can put money in that, and that's a good thing. What I'd also like to see is to make sure that we elevate the standards that are required of people like me who make decisions on who get to be police officers, right? And that we talk about robust and intense background investigations, not just picking up the phone and saying, hey, this person worked for you, is he okay, or she okay? But doing what Kent does, which is if you live in Georgia and you want to work at Kent, we have a detective who goes to Georgia, talks to your neighbors, talks to your ex-wife maybe, which is maybe sometimes unfair, but talk to the people that work with, you know. You have to do your due diligence. The authority granted to law enforcement officers is life and death. And so when you screen for who's coming into your organization, that is the way you have to look at it. We get people from all over the country and sometimes from outside the United States to apply here. And it is a tough deal to get in. There's psychological screening, emotional screening, criminal history screening. We do it full tilt. And the unfortunate part is, if you didn't know this, most of our law enforcement agencies in Washington State are less than 10 officers. So the question for them is, hey, I have one person working today on the street. Who's going to fly to Florida to do the background check? Who's going to be the investigator to make sure that quality people of character and ethics and morals are going to be part of your police department? So it is one of the issues that's been put out there, and I wish we could get more conversation from the practitioners a little bit to say, that's a great place, let's get a national registry, no issue. But let's put money into ensuring that the standards have to be the highest standards to get in. And let's attack it that way and make sure we're doing it. So, and I want to say, if you have any issues from another department and you want to be a Kent officer, need not apply. Okay? Above all of that is, for the city of Kent, if you don't have a culture, one of the standing things I ask in our background check is, what is their history of being a servant to their community in roles where they're not being compensated? Okay? Because if you don't have a servant's heart to come in, I don't want to hire you, and I can't train you to be that way. I think you demonstrate that before you become concise.
Go ahead, Andre.
I know we're about to go, but the part B to that question that you asked, so that was basically a secular approach to seeing things change, but from a sacred approach, we have what's called courageous conversations taking place in the city of Federal Way. We have a 4 to 6 week curriculum that we're introducing to all churches, but predominantly those who are of the dominant cultural majority race, who want to engage in this conversation, and they have a heart to want to see things change but don't know what to do. And so these conversations provide them with the biblical basis, some of which I spoke about today, to begin to talk about definition of terms. What does white fragility mean? What is a microaggression? What is white privilege? And it's grating and offensive to those who tend to be white. It's offensive. And so for those who tend to be black or brown, if they mention the cause, and maybe not the organization, Black Lives Matter, and someone else says all lives matter, that's offensive. So if you're not having conversations with each other for the sole purpose of gaining understanding, then we're going to continue to placate and talk about the things that aren't relevant for change. And so we actually have churches who are engaging in this curriculum, bringing in minority believers and establishing some kind of ministry in their church, whether they call it Love Thy Neighbor or whether they call it Courageous Conversation. But if we don't begin to do that within the body of Christ, then we're not going to impact our culture the way in which God intended.
Thank you. Right.
I just wanted to say 2 things really quick. Number one, I leveraged my relationship to virtually everybody on this platform to get you to come. I'm thankful that you said thank you. First of all, some of you I knew really well. Some of you, it was like, you remember me. I'm that guy's pretty much bald on top and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But you said yes, and I just want to say thank you for coming. The other thing I was just going to say is that if you're here, you heard something you probably didn't agree with completely. And as Andre just said a few moments ago, validation doesn't require agreement. And the topic of reconciliation, by definition, means you're going to have a wobbly moment, because you're bringing some people together in a room or in a one-on-one or whatever. And I just say this and turn it back to Grantley is, we're going to need to work through wobbly moments in order to get there. That's all.
Well, thanks, Pastor Ebb. Thanks all of our panelists for coming today. And sorry we didn't get to too many questions, but I hope you learned something today. We plan to do this 2 more times within the next year and probably have it a little bit more focused as well. But Andre, you gave a really good conclusion, so I'll cut my conclusion in half, because you did the first part for me, and I really want to thank you for doing that without planning. This is the 3rd time Andre and I have worked together on panels, and we sort of developing a thing to speak each other's mind. So it's tempting to reduce complex issues to simple sound bites and only create chaos and confusion. But let us commit to avoid the temptation for easy answers and half-baked solutions. And let us begin to commit to the hard work of solid thinking and working together to find lasting solutions. Resist the temptation of the 30-second soundbite, the 90-second soundbite, and let us try to get to, from one, begin to have conversations with one another, as Pastor Andre said. Begin to include in your circle people of color, different ethnicity, different language, and begin to learn from them. Engage in your civic responsibility to be involved at the community council, the city council, public discourse, and to vote, because we decide who sits in these chairs. Set a bookmark at the chief's website, Police Chief Kent's website, and see what is going on there. Keep him accountable as he's asked for. Send him an email. If you can send him an email directly from that website, and he promises to get back to you. And become more educated. Become more educated, as Dr. Newby said, and how our lives intertwine and how we can make a difference in the lives of other people. So this town hall is going to be posted on our YouTube channel in a few days for the church. If you're online, you should see that come up in a minute. It's also going to be available in an audio format on my podcast. My podcast is called Above the Noise, Faith, Race, and Reconciliation. And you can subscribe to that at any of the podcast hosting sites, Deezer, Apple, Google, any of those. That'll be the audio version. The full video and audio version will be available on the YouTube channel. The police chief's website is always available. Please check that out. Thank you for joining us. I also want to say thanks to our technical team. There have been a lot of people behind the scenes putting this together. You know, Ev and I came up with the idea standing in the parking lot while we were trying to feed 500 people, 700 people one Wednesday morning. But these people actually made it happen. We went to them and said, we want to do this. Can you make it happen? Can you get it? And that's Brian and Mark and Janelle and Jude, who is the trainee. Jude is the youngest member of our technical team. They worked hard to put this on together. I want to thank our ushers, Linda, Denise, Raphael, Gary, and Russell, and all the people who've been working to do this today. And for you online, we want to thank you for joining us. We hope you found this here and online to be useful. All these people are available, and what I hope to do is, if you came in here and you're saying, what do I want to do? How do I get involved? But I don't know how to get involved. There's 12 people up here that you can talk to before you leave about how you can get involved. So there's no reason not to get involved after today. So and for you online, thank you again. As we leave today, because of the COVID restrictions, let's leave by the same door that we came in and avoid going through the rest of the building. But thank you again, and may God bless you and keep you. May He cause His face to shine upon you and give you peace. Thank you.